shows us that this companionship that people find is not only about procreation and survival. It's about bonding, it's about protection, it's about family systems and community. So some of you may be thinking like, oh, but humans aren't animals. And that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just noting that God's creation is so much further and wider and deeper than we can understand. So with that in mind, let's talk about what the word eunuch means. I'm going to talk about scripture from Acts. It's Acts chapter 8. And in that scripture is where the Ethiopian eunuch is baptized by Philip. So most of us were probably taught something along the lines of a eunuch was a castrated male who took care of the queen's court and the harem. And that is one definition of a eunuch, but it is not the only definition. Most historians and biblical scholars agree that eunuch refers to someone whose body or social role did not fit the expected gender or sexual expectations. So many eunuchs lived outside of marriage, outside of an inheritance, outside of the honor from their family. And if you think about what that meant, they were giving up their ability to be cared for in old age or to pass down land, which would have been important for survival. They were treated as complicated, both religious and socially, so they were sent to the margins and kept out of spaces that people congregated in. And that's what makes the story of Acts 8 so powerful, is that we're not talking about one specific group of people. We're talking about a whole spectrum of people that didn't fit societal norms. So the story starts with the Spirit telling Philip to go and join this chariot, and Philip does. And he doesn't enter that space with suspicion. He starts with presence, he listens, and he opens up the scripture. He walks alongside the eunuch. And I want to take a minute and note that this is happening on the road from Jerusalem back to Ethiopia. And it is interesting to think about this passage along with things like the road to Emmaus, where Jesus shows up and opens the scriptures to the disciples after his death and resurrection. And the passage right after this, where Saul is confronted and turned into Paul on the road to Damascus. So what we see sometimes on these desert road journeys is that God shows up and God surprises us in how real and factual God's revelations are in those places. The big question on this journey, as Philip and the eunuch speak, is that the eunuch says, look, here is water. What is to prevent me from being baptized? And that question explodes a lot of vulnerability into this space, because what the eunuch is actually asking is, what is it about me? Is it my body? Is it my story? Is it the category you've put me in? Is it what makes me different that keeps me from being baptized? He's being very vulnerable in this question. And Philip's response tells us everything we need to know. He doesn't debate. He doesn't say, let me go check with the other elders. He doesn't even say, let me pray about this. He just baptizes him. And I think that's where we find the gospel message, that nothing prevents those who come to Jesus from being with Jesus. And the story ends on a very positive note. The eunuch is rejoicing and on his way, and Philip is snatched up by the Holy Spirit, is the word my Bible uses, which I find hilarious and fascinating. But we know from other scripture that good works are shown by their fruit. So if the mark of the Spirit is good fruit, then the good fruit in this story is that the eunuch left closer to God. The eunuch left more whole than when he first encountered Philip. And as we enter our conversation tonight, I hope that we can talk about sexuality and gender not from a place of fear, but from a place of knowing that creation is good, that Jesus brought in the marginalized, and that the Spirit led Philip to baptize without question, welcoming this person into the community. I hope we also learn more ways to be kind to the community, ways to listen without fear and shame and guilt, and ways to be a people who, when we are confronted with questions like, what is to prevent me, we answer with mercy, grace, and hospitality. So with all of that in mind, I'm going to pass it off to my friends.
Thank you. All right, can you still hear me? Yes, good. So as I named earlier, I'm Marie, and I'm a Presbyterian pastor. And this story for me starts probably when my oldest child was born, back in, I think, 2007. I have to think. I have too many children. And that kiddo had always kids said, let me go find the picture. And they went, and then they were searching on the internet, and finally they're like, Mom, I can't find these pictures anymore. What's the word that I'm looking for? It means not a boy and not a girl, and it starts with an A. And I was like, androgynous? And my kid was like, yes. And so we looked up androgynous hairstyles, and my kid was like, perfect, I found it. And about 6 months later, we had a conversation about pronouns, which Braylon will talk more about later. And finally, my child was like, Mom, I'm not a girl. And by that time, their parents were like, yeah, we know. But it was difficult because as a pastor, I found myself kind of thinking, how is the church going to handle this? Because even though the Presbyterian Church does have affirming theology, I wasn't so sure about the church that I was serving at that time. And keep in mind, we were still in the throes of the pandemic, and so there was a lot of free-floating anxiety in the world, and I just didn't feel like it was safe for my kid to be themselves in my church, the church I was leading. And with that in mind, we started thinking about what we could do, and we started asking ourselves, well, how can we find other people? And KMO asked if we could attend the Trans Day of Remembrance, and this is an international acknowledgement of how many people have lost their lives globally to gender violence because they were trans or non-binary. And so we went, and there was a moment of silence at this event. And in that moment of silence, something enormous happened. My whole family was there, and so I had all 3 of my children tucked into my wings, and we had been listening to the roll call of all the people in Arkansas who had died from transphobia and gender-based violence. And there was a moment of silence between each of those. And then in one of those moments of silence, my youngest child, who at the time was 7, said in that child whisper that is louder than any other microphoned voice, and it reverberated through the room, my youngest child, John, asked, Mom, is Kamo going to be murdered for being trans? And for me, time stopped. Just completely stopped. And I realized that I had to give an answer out loud, and I had to mean it. And so I said, no, baby. Kamo won't be murdered for being trans. We're just going to have to change the world. And so after that, and frankly, like 3 weeks of crying, I perceived that my call to the church was changing. I really enjoy called ministry in the parish, but I was being called out of it into a really uncomfortable place where they don't pay very well, and recognized that I needed to help build a community that would help people, families, who were working through what it means to not be straight heterosexuals, because that's what society tends to prefer, tends to think of as normal, is people that, are heterosexual and are in the bodies that they were given. Don't worry about it. You dropped the mic. A really good moment, too. And so basically, at that time, there had just been a massacre at Club Q where I think 42 individuals were killed. It might be 47. It was a huge number of trans and queer individuals were killed. And there wasn't really a response to it that we saw in Arkansas. So we had a memorial on the Capitol steps. And at that memorial, I started handing out little slips of paper that said, "Hi, I'm the mom of a queer kid. Are you? Would would you like to have dinner? And that's how this all got started, was a potluck, meeting other queer families. And this is where I'm going to explain what that is. Queer has been a very pejorative term in the past. And if that gives you icky feelings, that's understandable. But we are reclaiming it as a really beautiful umbrella term. And as Braylon will talk about, you can say LGBTQIA2 Spirit Plus, but it's a little bit of a mouthful. And yes, here we go. And queer simply means not heterosexual and straight. And the way we define queer family is simply this: if you love and support anyone who is queer, congrats, you're a queer family. And so I would just kind of ask you, do you know and support someone who is lesbian or gay or bisexual or trans? Just raise your hand. Do you know or love anyone like that? Congrats, you are a queer family. And not everyone is directly related in the same household, but especially now, as the world has become less safe in the last year, it becomes all the more important to understand what's happening and how you can help. And so with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to my friend Braylon, who is one of our trainers for allies as well as self-defense, and a good friend.
Thank you. Unlike Marie, I am going to have to reference my notes. So Marie just almost made me cry, and then I'm going to go into technical definitions. So we're going to start with LGBTQ+. Hopefully these are somewhat legible. I know they're kind of far away. So LGBTQ+ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning. And then we got tired of adding letters, so we put a plus to fill in all of the other letters. And so that's just kind of a definition when we say LGBTQ+, that's what we mean. When we say queer, it's a faster way to say LGBTQ+. But like Marie said, it used to really be an insult. And if you're not comfortable using the word queer, that's okay. You don't have to. But a lot of us are reclaiming it. So now I'm going to go into a little more education about what it means to be queer. And I found that the easiest way to do this is to break down how we think of gender. And so typically in our society, when we think of gender, right, we think somebody's a man, that means they are male, that means they are masculine, and that means that they like women, right? That's kind of the typical. And what we've found, the queer community has found, is that that's not always the case, that all of those aspects can be separate. So, biological sex is the physical, right? It's the doctor held the baby up at birth and said it's a boy or it's a girl, right? This is hormones. This is secondary sex characteristics, low voice, body hair, breast development, etc. And I'm going to pass these out. Normally I spread them out, but we have 4 people, so
I got you.
You're going to hold biological sex. The next one in my row is gender identity. Right? This is how we think of ourselves. So this is man. This is woman. This is what we call non-binary, which means neither man nor woman. Right? And so in separating these out, what we can say is okay, somebody is male, but that doesn't mean man. Right? Male, but could be a woman. And so that's where transgender comes in. Right? So trans, the prefix, I'm a technical writer, it's my profession. The prefix trans means across, transatlantic, across the Atlantic, right? So transgender, across gender. We also have the word cisgender. I don't think I have a sheet. Anyway, cisgender. Cis means same, right? Cis-Atlantic means same. So that would be male, man. Transgender, male, we have, these go in order for a reason.
Oh, okay. Where do you want it?
I'm holding this one.
You want me to hold that one? Like right here?
You're gonna hold this.
I'm gonna hold this one.
This one is gender expression, right? This is how we express ourselves. This is long hair or short hair. This is clothing, how we walk, how we talk, which again can be separate from identity, what we think of ourselves, and separate from biological sex, our physical body. And the last one, I have attraction. Think sexuality. Yes, sexuality. So this is who we like who we love, who we're interested in. And so, if this is confusing and you're like, I don't understand, and I'm mind-boggled, that's okay. I am transgender. I figured this out as an adult, and it took me 2 years to work this out as somebody who is transgender. And so, if you're thinking, I don't get it, that's okay. It's a lot to wrap our head around. It's a complete reframing from what a lot of our society operates, how we, our societal norms. I am going to do a quick demonstration that's going to involve moving away from the mic.
Yes. You want to take the mic?
Somebody else may have to, because I need both hands.
That's what Amanda has to do. It's her job.
So this is I said demonstration, that makes it sound exciting. The difference between identity and expression, right? How I feel about myself and how I express myself. So I brought with me a skirt, right? The difference between me now and me now, like what is the difference really?
Skirt.
A skirt. And terrible color coordination. Like I feel like I'm walking Christmas. And so it's a skirt. How I think about myself, my biological reality, none of that has changed. Only the expression has. That's the difference.
It's festive, though.
Festive,
It
yes,
is festive.
It is festive. Okay, biological sex. Let me check my notes.
Got this.
Okay. So that's the very basic idea about gender in the queer community. There's a lot of words we use. There's a lot of vocabulary. We don't have time to get into it, nor is there time to comprehend it all in one session. I've done a lot of trainings. I have seen that. And so, but this is the fundamental idea of a lot of that vocabulary, is separating these out. Okay, so getting a little bit into transgender, right? Somebody who is back, I want to touch back onto the binaries that we're talking about. We talk about biological sex, male and female. And for a lot of us, that is very straightforward. But not for everybody. We have something called intersex. And that is somebody who does not cleanly fit into male or female. And there are lots and lots and lots of different kinds of intersex. And that's the biological, to overuse a term, biological reality for some people. So an example that I know off the top of my head, there are people who have chromosomes, genetics, that are XXY. Right? Not what we expect necessarily. There's a condition called complete androgen insensitivity syndrome. And that's where somebody's body just doesn't respond to testosterone. And so a person will have XY chromosomes, but physically be entirely female in every way. And so there's a lot of in-between male and female that don't fit into these two boxes. So for transgender, right, somebody who's assigned male at birth, who's male, but is a woman, or maybe is non-binary, but is not a man. Get just a little bit into a couple misconceptions that are really common with that. One is transition, right? We talk a lot about transition, probably heard talk about the surgery, right? So the reality of transition is that it's complicated, and it's a whole process. It doesn't happen overnight. There's not a, like, completion line where you go like, okay, I've done everything, I'm done. That, it's not that clean. And so, some people have surgery, some don't. Some go on hormones, some don't. So some types of transition, right? There's social transition. That's maybe wearing different clothes, using a different name, using different pronouns, maybe using a different bathroom. So social transition. There's medical transition. There's
Emotional.
yes, there's a lot of working through emotions. And one thing to know about that is that transition is done age appropriately. There's a lot of myths out there about what we allow kids to do. And the reality of kids transitioning is that they wear different clothes, and the vast majority of the time, it's wear different clothes, use a different name, use different pronouns. Like, and some like therapy, some non-medical interventions, right? And so that's what's done for kids. What's done for kids going into puberty is they're called puberty blockers, and all they do is pause it. They prevent changes. They don't cause changes. They just stop it and gain a little bit of time for the kid to grow up a little bit before having to make a decision about which puberty to go through. And so there's a lot of fear out there about what we're subjecting children to, and the reality of it is that nothing permanent. Okay, the last thing, before I switch gears a little bit, is a lot of people go, I'm really terrified of saying the wrong thing, asking the wrong question, saying the wrong thing. And that means that you want to be respectful. That is very appreciated. A sort of quick trick is called the switch it technique. And that's to turn it around and say, would I ask somebody who is cisgender, who is not transgender, the same question? And if the answer is no, then it's probably not okay to ask a transgender person. Right? And so a sort of extreme example of that is medical questions. You know, I have had people look at me and say, have you had the surgery? It's happened more than once. And so the question is, would you ask somebody who is not transgender that question? No. And if the answer is yes, then we should probably have a conversation about boundaries. Right? And so that's a quick and dirty way, a quick and easy way to say, I want to say this thing, is it okay? And it's generally a good rule of thumb. So with that knowledge, hopefully percolating, again, I know it's a lot, I want to talk a little bit about me. I am transgender. I was assigned female at birth. I am not a woman, and I never was, even though we thought I was up until the time I was about 19 or 20. So a lot of people say, I knew from the time I could talk. I did not. I took the reasoning of, they say I'm a girl, I feel like this, therefore girls feel like this. It turns out girls did not feel like that. That was what trans boys feel like. And so I was an adult, and it took a long time for me to figure it out, right? This was a thing that, one, I didn't choose. It was discovered. I came across it and said, oh, I'm going to have to process that. So I didn't choose it. I discovered, and then there was a lot of processing time. And I sat on it and I processed it for months. And then I started, telling people. And then they have to go through the same processing time. And so my parents back there can assure you that there was an awkward time there where I was really getting comfortable with it, and my mom was going, "What is happening?" And the reality of it is that transitioning is a vital piece of our health. It is, for a lot of people, it is the difference between life and death. Not for everybody. For the rest of us, it's the difference between living and existing. Right? I'm so much happier now than I was before I transitioned, before I came out. Even though I didn't realize what was wrong, it was a weight I was carrying. So I want to talk a little bit about the threats to our community right now. So the politics currently are contentious. And so it's hard to know where to start with this because it's so fundamental to those are currently in power. Yeah, you can set this down if you want. And I think to summarize it is I was reading about an interview that the Heritage Foundation president did just a few days ago. And I don't know how much you know, but a lot of what's going on was a plan put together by the Heritage Foundation, and they have a lot of sway. And the Heritage Foundation president was asked on a podcast how you deal with, they use the word transgenderism, not one we use, but how do you deal with transgender people? And his response was, you outlaw it. That's outlawing people. And their way of outlawing it is to create police of all of us on each other. That's bathroom laws, where anybody who looks like they may be out of place can be attacked, and in some states now sued. Or I don't think it's fully gone through. But there are states that are now moving those laws into private businesses and saying individuals can be sued. The biggest threat right now is health care for transgender youth. That's why I spent some time talking about that. And the reality of healthcare for transgender youth is that it's almost impossible to get now. This is life-saving healthcare. This is life-altering healthcare. And they're just saying, no, it's bad.
Yes, I think it's worth just kind of noting that in Arkansas, you can no longer receive puberty blockers or hormones if you're under the age of 17. And that if those are medically necessary, people have to leave the state. And the closest states where such care is available is in Oregon, and specifically the Chicago area.
I know somebody who, thankfully they can afford it, they spend 10 grand every month to go get their kid health care in Oregon. They're increasingly coming after adult health care. They're, instead of going through the legislature, right, how we normally consider laws to be passed and such, that's a holdup, that's difficult. And so they're going after rules about what facilities that accept Medicaid and Medicare can do. And they're saying, okay, if you take any money for any reasons from Medicare or Medicaid, then you cannot do these transition services. For anybody who works in healthcare, that means that no healthcare place can do transition services. Everybody relies on that money. So they're starting to come after adults as well. they're coming after IDs. So can you imagine me having a driver's license that says female? Can you imagine what it would be like for me to go into a bar, for me to try to fly with a driver's license that says female? That's a reality I will very, very likely be facing in the next few months. And I'm not the only one. Pronouns in schools. They're saying that teachers now in Arkansas are not allowed to use nicknames. I say nicknames. They're not allowed to use names for students that don't align with their assigned sex at birth. They're not allowed to use different pronouns. They're going after the free speech, frankly. The social transition, the stuff that is non-permanent, that just makes kids' lives better. Sports, this is what I mean by it's so hard to even know where to start because they're coming after us. They are now openly saying, we are aiming to outlaw you. And I don't know how I can overstate that. I do want to end on a little bit of hope, and that's that they haven't done it yet. And so there's still room to fight. There's still space. So showing up, calling legislators, calling politicians, and saying, I don't like this. I'm one of your, what's the word?
Constituents.
Thank you. I'm one of your constituents. I don't approve of this. I don't like this. You're not representing me when you vote for this. I will vote for somebody else. That's the thing. Showing up to protest. And honestly, my biggest advice, if you want to get involved and help, is to reach out to the local queer organizations and ask them what they need. I'm a big fan of local direct action, and that's getting involved with the people in your area. And the only way to do that is to reach out and say, I'm here to do whatever you need me to do. Or here's what I can do you need it? Because they haven't done it yet, and we're not going anywhere. And it's eventually going to catch up to folks that a lot of these things that target transgender people also affect cisgender people. So, low-hanging fruit of an example, the bathrooms. Have you, I forget numbers now. Have you read any stories about cisgender women who have been accused of being transgender in bathrooms? It happens a lot. Somebody will see a woman with short hair and think, oh, that woman must actually be male, and proceed to harass her, and then be wrong. And so this stuff doesn't just affect us, this affects everybody. I feel like I was a little bit scattered.
I think you did great. Why don't we give David a chance and
Yes.
we can ask questions?
All right, well, good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you. So to give you a little bit of a different perspective on our community in two ways. I am gay. My husband and I have been together for almost a decade now and have a wonderful family and a very good life. And, you know, if you had asked me 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I was a college student, if that would ever be possible, I wouldn't have believed it could be. You see, I graduated high school in 1998. And so if you're familiar with queer history, that's shortly after the Matthew Shepard situation happened, and that murder was my freshman year of college. And so very early on, at a time when I was trying to understand who I was, a very strong message was sent about how society regarded people like me. And so didn't make a terribly comfortable space to come out in. And I was also raised in a very conservative religious environment. And so, you know, when I thought about being gay, my understanding was that it was something like having a gambling problem or having a drug problem. I'm sorry if you have those temptations, but you need to just not do it. And that was the prevailing understanding at that time. And so, I always had that Bible verse quoted to me that said, resist temptation and it will flee from you. And so I always thought that if I prayed enough, at some point, the straight angel would come down, bop me on the head, and there we'd be, and all would be well. And, the thing that I guess was kind of darker side to that, I believed that I was acting in obedience, and I got married. I had a family. I did the things that I thought God wanted me to do, and I was sure that at some point I would become straight because I was doing all the right things. And what I realized at some point was that the struggle that I was dealing with within myself was also a lack of integrity to my spouse. And so I was honest about what I was dealing with and where I was, and unfortunately that ended up coming to an end. And that's something that I've always had to deal with, is the fact that because I didn't truly know who I was or understand myself, I made a decision that caused harm to others. And you know what? That's something that I'll always have to know and own. But the one thing that it's helped me to be able to do is to talk to other people and say, look, you're always better off to tell the truth. Whether the truth is easy or hard, you're always better off to tell the truth and work from there. And sometimes telling the truth starts with telling the truth to the person you see when you look in the mirror. And the part of this I was asked to talk about was orientation. And if your gender identity is like looking in a mirror, your orientation is like your compass pointing outward. It's the part of you that says, who do I love? Who can I build a life with? And the truth is, sometimes that's a very hard thing to get okay with when society's giving you other messages. And I think it's kind of interesting when we hear all the letters, we wonder, well, why does that community need a whole mouthful of alphabet soup to talk about who they are? And I get it. I get it. It's a lot. But the way I think of it is this: if you can ever think about what it was like, think about your first day of high school. And you walked into the cafeteria, and everybody who'd already been there had their lunch table, and you were walking in with your little tray, and you were like scared to death and trying to figure out where to sit. You know that moment I'm talking about? And then you finally see a table over here with people who look like you, and you think, oh, good, those people are the same kind of nerd I am. I can go sit with them, and it'll be okay. Or, hey, that's the band people or the theater people, whoever. I found my club. I think sometimes when you hear all those letters, what you hear are people looking for their lunch table. They need to be able to share the journey with somebody who's struggled with the same things they struggled with and hurt in the same places they've hurt. And so if it seems like it's maybe a little weirdly specific sometimes, the thing is, everybody needs to have a place that they can say, yeah, that table right there, those are my folks. I belong. I fit there. And they need a place to share. And for me, being a part of the queer community, being part of the queer collective has been a space like that. Because it's been a space where I've helped understand myself, my family, being a parent. And I'm very thankful that today there are churches where I can also have a space to still be a Christian. There was a time when if you were a member of the queer community, a space like this wouldn't have been open to you. And some of you all are my age and up. You know what I'm talking about. You know that there was a time when being gay and saying that you were a member of a church wouldn't have flown. And to see now that a church is hosting a space to have a conversation, not saying everybody has to walk away with the same opinion or that everybody has to agree, but even being willing to have a conversation says we've come a long way from where we were 20, 30 years ago. And I'm so thankful to see that the church has become a space that can bring people in. When I think about all the things that are said in the world, the things that you don't often hear are the messages of Jesus. The message of love, the message of forgiveness, the message of caring about people even when you don't understand them. If you think about who Jesus spent his time with when he was on this earth, he hung out with prostitutes, with tax collectors. If you think about Jesus never looked for perfect people to spend his time with. Jesus looked for people with open hearts who were willing to hear his message and to love each other and to love him. And I hope that maybe the one takeaway that you can have from tonight is that we can be a people of love even when we may not fully understand, even when we may not fully agree. We can say that God's table is big enough to be a place of radical hospitality, and that even if I don't understand somebody, I know that they can be loved by God just like I can. And I think that if we can take anything away from a night like this, that would be my one hope, is that no matter what a person's orientation, no matter what their identity, that when you look at God's table, you can see a seat for them too.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, all three of you, for sharing your stories with us. We are to the point now that we could accept questions. Does anybody have a question? Anything you want to ask?
Yeah, so I was just saying I have a really great testimony to share, if that's okay. Okay, I'll go ahead and stand up. So I'm from Conway, Arkansas. It's in Central Arkansas area, and my whole life I went to Conway Christian School, a very small private school in Conway. My graduating class was 31, and this was, as he mentioned. Growing up in a very conservative atmosphere. The 31 kids that I graduated with, 12 of them I went to kindergarten with, and we knew each other's families, and we attended the same churches, and our social lives were so visible. And so my world changed a little bit, and now a lot of it, when someone came to my school in 10th grade. Her name was Liberty Wallace. She was a choir kid. We went to All-State together. And suddenly she became one of my best friends. And as we entered COVID, Liberty came out to me that he was trans. And I had just an amount of work to do in myself to accept that. Because I was like, what does it say about me that I'm friends with this person? What is it, how do I accept this person? And the reality of the situation was, and this continued into college, I maintained my relationship with him. They now go by the name Woody. Woody actually came to church with me one day. I don't know if you remember this, but sung in the choir with us. But I came to a situation where I was a Christian, and I've always been a Christian, and I've always known that to be a Christian means to treat people with love and acceptance. And so I came to this conclusion where I was like, okay, I'm in a situation where if I confront Woody with the truth of sin, I smack him over the Bible with the Leviticus verse, I smack him over the head with what Paul says, then I have destroyed this relationship forever, and I will never speak to him again. And so I had to make the decision. What am I going to choose? Am I going to choose my own interpretation of Scripture over my relationship with this person? And I just chose to maintain the relationship and accept them as they were and admit that I don't understand it because I don't experience it. And I'm forever changed because of it. And I remember Woody and his wife Brooklyn. They live in Portland, Oregon now, for a lot of the reasons that you were saying earlier. And so it's my experience with this. It happened to me. I didn't get to choose it. And at the end of the day, it was I can love this person, or I can love them with the Bible and lose them forever. So I chose to love them. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you. Jeffrey.
so much for sharing. One of the reasons why Queer Collective exists is because as we were finding each other, we were finding more and more people who were asking the question, but how do I have a relationship with? And that's one reason why we have Braylon, who will do the ally trainings. I know earlier I just kind of jumped straight into pronouns, and you know pronouns mostly is she, her, hers, he, him, his. My kiddo is they, them, theirs. And the way that I explained that to my parents was, well, Kamo is neither male nor female. They're in between. And in English, we don't have an in between. So we use they and them. But I really appreciate you sharing that. One of the other reasons why we decided that we needed to form a community was because of how many people have had the experience of someone choosing their interpretation over love and relationship. And one of the most impactful stories that I bear, because I collect stories out of us, was for this family. And this family had a child who was able to come to see his parents and say, I think I'm gay. And the parents were like, oh dear, we don't have a church that accepts that. But the parents went to church leadership. This is, I'm going to go ahead and say the name of the church, it's Fellowship Bible. And you'll see why here in a second. And the leaders of that church said, well, you know what Scripture says, you know, being gay is not okay, but we'll work with you through that. And the family was like, okay, we'll try that. And then over time, the child said, actually, I'm also not a boy. I'm a trans girl. And when the parents went to the church about that, the church was like, oh no, we're so sorry. You're going to need to leave. And they said, okay, we'll take some time. We'll take some time away from it. And the parents did what I would hope any parent would do, which was go to their doctors and go to their therapists and to each other and think very deeply about what it means to love this child that they don't understand. And the parents were in a place of figuring it out when the child got a diagnosis of brain cancer. And the family was like, oh, this is more than we can bear alone. We need our people. So they went back to the church and to their pastor and said, we just had this terrible diagnosis and we need you. We need our praying community. And the pastor said, I need to think about it. And then went on YouTube on a video that I believe is still up and shared why this child was experiencing a cancer diagnosis because of their transgender sin. And I just want to name a couple things. One, that's heresy. God doesn't punish children with cancer. But also it fundamentally misunderstands what it is to be an incarnated theology, where our lived experience is part of how we receive God. So I want you to feel for a minute what it is to be told that God has completely rejected you and has punished you with cancer. That family left the church and didn't come back, except when we started doing this. And this is not, by the way, a church that preaches out of the Scripture. We preach out of our presence with each other in the hard moments of life. And I remember talking to this mom in our parents group because she was weeping and said, this is the first time I've been back in a church. And y'all, we were just in like a random parlor. We weren't in the sanctuary. But that was the first time she had felt welcomed back into a place of God's love and welcome. And I think it matters as Presbyterians because of what we believe about baptism. that if someone is baptized once, anywhere, wherever you did it, it matters. It still counts. And so there is this baptized child that has been rejected by one corner of Christendom. And the question then becomes, who goes after that child? Who extends love into the places where we're uncomfortable and doesn't quote scripture, but instead asks, what would Jesus have me do? And I can't think of a single time Jesus told his followers, quote scripture at them. So I'm really grateful for your story. And I just want to say that, like you said, David, being open to having these conversations, however uncomfortable and weird they are, is such an important place to be, because I cannot overstate how much harm is free-floating in the world today out of our fellow brothers and sisters who are hurting others. And I do think we have somewhat of an obligation when we make those baptismal vows, and especially in the Presbyterian Church, and we're like, we will raise you up and we will love you forever, even if you go very far away. And then people come to us and we're like, yes, those baptismal vows count for you too. We will love you, we will take care of you, and we will figure it out. And to say that there are former Christians and folks who have been hurt by the wider church, and they have not heard the gospel of, I don't understand, but I know God loves you. Haven't heard it because the other voice is much louder. Much. But I do want to make sure we take time here to say that Braylon does such a really good job when we have classes, because they're usually pretty small, like less than 6, right?
Usually less than 6. I think I've had up to 12 or 14.
Yeah, they're usually pretty small classes. But what's nice about them is we try to make it a safe space where folks know you can come with your weird questions and you're like, I don't understand what to do. Or you very wisely say, I know I shouldn't ask this of my one trans friend. But you need to ask somebody. And so we once held a class at Second Presbyterian Church that I think we called What's Up With My Grandkids' Pronouns? Something like that. It may have just been the working title. I may not have been allowed to have that. But we want to create a little container where we can say, if you have questions or what ifs, or I don't understand, that is okay. What's not okay is coming out hot and being like, you're going to hell. I would just like to point out that not all Presbyterians believe in literal hell. Sometimes where we are right now is hell. Please see my previous comment about middle school. I would just like to say, I would like this time to be a time where you guys can ask questions. And there is no dumb question. And I'm also going to say, if you don't start raising your hand, I'm going to start assuming questions, because we've got plenty. So toss them out. What you got?
I'm going to throw out there, too, I gave the rule of thumb of the switch it technique, right? Would I ask a straight person this question? Right now, that rule is null and void. You can ask me anything. If it is inappropriate, I will tell you I'm not comfortable answering that. And so that's a really good rule of thumb. This is a safe space to ask those questions. At least to me. I can't speak.
Yay, questions.
So I recognize how heavy the conversation is and how hopeful it is also. I'm a student of language. I was a German major. I was a French.
Ich spreche
I
Deutsch.
speak a little Spanish. So my question is really a linguistic question with the they and the there. To me, that's plural words. And I keep wondering whether it will come into the vocabulary or whether it's insulting to come into the vocabulary to have some new words that describe the need for they and their.
So first I'm going to talk a little bit about singular they. So one thing is we already have it in our vernacular. We just don't realize it, right? somebody forgot their jacket. We're just not used to using it for an individual person that we can name and whose face we can picture. We're used to using it for a nebulous unknown person. And so we're just bringing it into individuals that, like I said, we can name. Another interesting thing about singular they, it is actually older than singular you. Right? You've all read the things that say thou and thee. Like that was singular you, and you was plural. And so they started using they for a single person before we started using you for a single person. There are examples from Shakespeare has a couple spots where he used they to refer to a single person. And so it's in there. This is just a little bit different of a use case. We also have what we call neo-pronouns. And these are pronouns that are new, that fill in that gap. There are dozens. I kid you not, I cannot list all of them. I certainly cannot use all of them. And so there are things like AM. It's like they, them, but without the TH. AM. Fay, fair. There are lots and lots of other ones that people are experimenting with and using. My advice on that is if you know somebody who uses a pronoun set, learn that pronoun set. Don't try to memorize them all unless you just want to. Am I missing any part of your question? I feel like
Before we move on to the next question, I want to point out something that it was actually Kamo that taught me linguistically. I was the chaperone in Kamo's cabin one time, like post-COVID sometime, and Kamo needed something from Marie, and so she said, hey, apologize. They said, hey, I need to text my mom, and then I'll come down. We were going breakfast or something. I'll come down later. Is that okay? And I said, oh, yes, ma'am, that's fine. Because I typically, even with the youth, I use ma'am and sir, and Kamo looked at me and said, I don't like that. Can you just say yes or no? And I was like, oh, kudos to a teenager for saying that to adult, right? That's a really hard conversation to have. But it was at that moment, it's not just pronouns that we carry gendered language with. There is no word like sir or ma'am in the English language that is non-gendered. So to show that respect to Kamo in a way that felt right for Kamo was something impossible at that time.
And what ended up happening, because you see that kind of honorifics, and honorifics tend to be gendered, is people starting to ask that question. So for Kamo is involved in a martial arts club, and they had started saying sir and ma'am for when students were in the process of becoming leaders. And Kamo named that wasn't comfortable because they were not a sir or a ma'am. And so they actually had a conversation about what would be appropriate and ended up using a word from another language that was appropriate to the tradition, which was senpai at that time, which means teacher or student teacher or brother or something.
Older student.
Older student. And now Kamo has a black belt and so gets called sensei. But that was kind of one of those questions, is that what is it going to be more appropriate as? And in our family, it's really funny, and I hope my parents don't see this video, but my mom still struggles, but she's trying. My dad kind of went through the phase of, well, I just won't use any pronouns at all, ever, which is also perhaps even more so linguistically challenging. It can be done, but that was a place where one of Kamo's teachers was also, one of Kamo's high school teachers said, I'm really uncomfortable using they, them pronouns. I'm just not going to use pronouns. And on the whole, he did okay. But he did have one or two times where he caught himself into a linguistic trap and couldn't describe what was happening at the moment, and had said Kamo like 10 times in a row. And eventually just had to stop talking. But what we ended up finding was that trying to honor people where they're at in their own journey of trying to honor the person that they're with is something that both parties have to kind of come to the middle. The compromise is saying, I want to have a relationship. The compromise is saying, I want to respect you. And so I think the hardest part about this is when that other person is different somehow that you don't understand, and you have to ask how to be respectful. into an age or through a time where knowledge was rightness and not knowing was wrongness. And so we were very uncomfortable being in the student-learner position. And so I want to encourage everyone that, none of you are old dogs. No one here is an old dog. You are mature people who are still learners. It's why you go to Sunday school. It's why you like PBS. It's why you are interested in what's happening in the world, is because you are already constantly taking in new information and reforming your worldview. So if you've got someone in your life who's different in this way, all you really need to know is whether or not you are willing to accept them for how they understand their own self. And you don't have to approve of it, but you can learn what they know about themselves and honor it. I see a man who has stood because there's a question.
I want to add one thing really fast.
All right.
I do have some resources on gender-neutral German and gender-neutral Spanish, if you are interested.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'd like to know how to speak to my grandchild. So Reed was born Skylar, a little girl in California, and we would visit them, and there was a real tough transition time, and we understood that, and I really reinforced my son and my daughter-in-law of how they stuck with Reed in that transition. But I don't have the confidence to talk to Reed directly. We text sometimes. He responds to that. He sends pictures. The whole family came for my 85th birthday party. It was wonderful. And so I speak to Reed through my son Scott, and I'd like to know give him some ideas about how to connect with Reed and really have a relationship with him.
I love that. That's really beautiful.
One thing that I didn't mention with transitioning, right, is it's easy to forget that they're still the same person, right? They're still for example, when I came out, I sent a message to a lot of our family friends and such, and I said, this is who I am, this is a thing you didn't know about me, and now you do, and also, I still would rather sit in the kitchen and talk with the women than sit in the living room and watch the football game. I'm still the same person, and so it's really easy to get caught up in this, here's the different sexual orientation than I thought, or different gender identity than I thought, or expression, or it's really easy to get caught up in that and forget that, that's still the grandchild that you love. They still have passions and interests. And so, that's still there, and so it's a matter of putting a different word sometimes and reconnecting with that.
Marie, can I?
Please, David, go ahead.
One of the reasons I wanted to be a part of this tonight is because I felt like maybe we needed somebody who could kind of be a bridge between generations. And I'm going to claim mid-40s, at least for another year. I'm saying mid instead of going to late, because we're hanging on to that as long as we can. But, here's something I'll tell you that from my experience, my generation and going older, there was a sense of you need to do things right. Don't mess it up. What you're going to find with this younger generation, it's really okay to be like, hey, listen, this is all new to me, and I don't really know how to get it right. Would you care to help me? And believe it or not, the thing you're going to find is that it's not whether you got it right or wrong. It's that you cared enough to say, hey, you matter to me, and I want to know about you, and I want to know about what matters to you in your life. Could you kind of educate me and tell me about this and help me get it right for you? And the fact that you care enough to want to get it right means a whole lot more than if you get it right every time or not. Does that make sense?
And I think we have a parents group, and it's probably our oldest support group is our parents group. so with fair frequency, we have this same conversation. So there's 3 tips that we often practice with our parents. And that's when you've got a new name for someone, you say it in your head 6 times before you say it out loud. And so I'd be like, Kamo, 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 Kamo. But that's just repetition. Another trick is that every time you get something wrong, you immediately compliment that person, whether they are in your presence or not. And so if I gave the wrong pronoun for Kamo, I'd be like, oh, who has a wonderful sense of style and dress. So you give a compliment, and if they're there in your person, you tell them the compliment. But this kind of helps to train the brain a little bit. And then the third one is to correct yourself, but don't beat yourself up. And so if you say the wrong name, the wrong pronoun, whatever, to just be like, oops, and then go on. Because the quick correction is all that's needed for them to know that you are paying attention and you care enough to do it right. Because I think very genuinely, the vast majority of folks that I know, whether they've changed their name because they got married or they've changed their name because it better reflects who they are as a person, they just want to have a relationship with you. And so if you can be open and honest enough to be like, oops, I've known you like this for a long time and I'm trying to change, that's all that's needed, is the intent. This is a place where the effort matters. And I would say to you, sir, with your grandchild, did you say read? Yeah, read. I would say with read, I'd just like to echo David. I might recommend being very brave and just reaching out to say, Reed, I want to have a better relationship with you. I'm afraid of saying something wrong. Can you teach me? Because I think he would just love to hear that you want to have a better relationship.
Well, you know, Marie, on a lighter note, being a native of Arkansas, 3/4 of the people I grew up with, I couldn't tell you what their government name was because we didn't call anybody what they were called on paper. I mean, and if you listen to some of the crazy nicknames that people in backwoods Arkansas give each other, I'm going to tell you what the kids are coming up with sounds way more normal than some of the nicknames we gave people.
You have to stop.
I'm Braylon's mom, and I have a suggestion for you with Reed, and they can tell me if this is a good one. But one thing that we started doing when Braylon is transitioning, like one time Ray took Braylon shopping, and they bought matching shirts. So I don't know, if you maybe just bought yourself and Reed a matching shirt, that shows him that you accept him as who he is, and you want to be like him as much as he wants to be like you. So I don't know, that just a suggestion.
And even if it's not, like matching shirts, it could be just kind of broad, more generalize it, I guess, is, say that I were a woman, then maybe like a dress and a shirt that have a matching pattern or something. But yes, I do like that suggestion.
I wanted to ask some other questions. Something strange happened in my family. There were 3 girls, and my younger sister at some point decided that she was going to get involved with a lot of girls. And there was somebody in San Francisco where I lived who was doing a lot of workshops with people communicating with each other. And all of a sudden, there was this one girl that she took a great deal of interest in. And I thought it was the girl talked her into something, So it was, now it turns out that that's where she is. But that was when she was quite a bit older, and she doesn't look different, So I don't know how to think about this, but I haven't been a really good communicator with her, and I think that I see that that's a problem. I went out there after Christmas with my daughter, and we had much more communication about her life and what she believes, and she's not religious, but she's very spiritual, and she's a very good musician. So I don't know. I mean, what does anybody think about that?
So, as somebody who came from a very conservative religious family and who my family still holds the views they hold, okay, that hasn't changed. But what we realized was this: I can love you beyond understanding. I don't understand why they feel the way they do, and they don't understand some things about my life. But what we figured out is that we don't have to agree on everything to agree that we love each other. And that has been one of the, I think, the biggest lessons for our family, is realizing, well, it's realizing that, love can surpass understanding. And I guess that's been part of the journey for us, is kind of coming to that understanding of a love that's bigger than maybe what we would have even understood it could be.
I'd throw out there too that, like, it's never too late to reach out and say, like, hey, I want to have a relationship, and even in the case of, like, maybe I didn't handle it well before, and I see that, and I want to do better.
She really doesn't know how I felt. I never told her how I felt. But it is hard for me to look back at that time and realize that this was really true about her, because I didn't believe it.
As somebody who came out older, I was in my 30s when I came out also, okay? And my parents had the same reaction at first. They were like, this can't be true. You're married, you have children, you have a family, you have a life, you have a nice house in the suburbs, you've got all the things that by the standards of traditional success, you've got a good life. Why would you do this? And I think that sometimes the thing is, she may not have been able to be completely honest, and I don't know her, so I'm not trying to speak for her, but she may have been working through that herself. And I think Braylon even alluded to that, going through a time where you're trying to figure things out, because it's not always easy to admit to yourself that you're not the person, or your orientation's not the same as you might have thought it was. Sometimes it's a whole inner journey.
Do we have any other questions? I want to echo words that a very wise woman told me when I was responsible for her child and had never encountered trans children before. That she looked at me and said, Kamo can tell if you make a mistake and it comes from a place of love versus if you make a mistake and it comes from a place of hate. She said, if you make a mistake, it's okay. Kamo will know that you're trying. And I think that is such an important thing, because it was a blessing to have an ordained minister of Word and Sacrament who told me how best to care for her daughter, and that I could ask all the inappropriate questions too.
Child, and it's
Child,
okay.
oh, see, I messed it up again. My apologies. Kamo is an amazing human who is far wonderful to be around.
Kamo's really, really fantastic.
I kind of want to speak to that too, that it shows, we can tell when somebody's being malicious and when somebody is making honest mistakes. And also, we still make mistakes.
Heck yeah.
I have a friend who I have known for over 10 years at this point. So 11 years. 10 of those years, they have gone by the name Alex and used they, them pronouns. 10 out of 11 years. And about twice a year, the wrong name slips out. It happens. It's going to happen. And I just go, oops, sorry, and say the correct name and go on. It's going to happen. Don't beat yourself up about it.
And Marie, can one thing I would build on that to say, it's not about perfection. And I think sometimes we can look at everybody else and we can say, oh, you don't have to be perfect for God to love you, or you don't have to be perfect to come to church. But then when we try to enter into relationships with people who are different from us, we think, oh, if I say anything wrong, I'm not good enough. Oh, if I misstep or misspeak, it's okay to mess up. And part of that holy hospitality that we hold for each other says, look, I can love you no matter what your orientation, no matter what your gender, And you can love me if I have a verbal slip every now and then and don't say something just right. And that's called grace cutting both ways and love cutting both ways. And I think you'll find most people, if you love, they're not going to be upset. They're going to be glad to love you and glad that you love them.
I would like to thank everyone who's kind of come tonight with this sort of holy curiosity about how to have these conversations, what is happening, and what's going on. I know we just have like a minute or two left, and I do kind of want to name like where we are at this moment in the life of the church, in the life of our country. So Queer Collective started 3 years ago out of the PCUSA's 1,001 new worshiping communities. I'm just going to set it aside that it's 1,001 because some other denomination has 1,000. It's true. We have 1,001.
Nothing wrong with some one-upsmanship. I respect it.
And out of that, we were like, we wanted to create a community. This community is 3 years old. We're about to apply for our final grant. That grant will last for 18 months. Yay! However, when we began this process, we understood that the government would be able to support this community with grants and with funding that was for sexual health, that was for suicide prevention, that was for healthy sexuality, parenting skills, and all of those resources are gone now. Every single last possible grant that was once available for helping our communities and their particularities has now utterly evaporated. We could not even apply for a $400 Arkansas Arts grant to bring a circus performer for a joy-based workshop because we primarily serve LGBTQ people. And that is a level of government oppression that we have not experienced in this country as white mainline Protestants until this point. And to say that Project 2025, which is available to you online and ChatGPT will happily summarize for you, explicitly states what its goals are. And among them is the goal of outlawing being transgender. That's not just removing it, it's criminalizing it. It's not just saying that aspects of our community can't get medical care. They are erased and can't exist.
May I quote an Arkansas legislature, one of our state legislatures, said that transgenderism needs to be eradicated from public life entirely. That is an exact quote. Eradicated from public life entirely.
And the problem about this is that if we are a land of the free, it's that people are free to be themselves, especially if they aren't hurting other people. And we name this now simply because we have noticed how people are shrinking. And by that what I mean is, this year when we had our leadership retreat, we didn't pass the budget, we didn't talk about the calendar, we talked about the fact that we have to add programming for migration because people need to escape. We talked about the fact that there was no more grants available and we were going to have to figure out how to do this without money. And we also talked about how we were going to have to figure out new ways to take care of our community and what that would look like. And so one of those ways is by telling other people what's happening and that it's happening right now. And it's happening to people you love and care about. But some of those people might not be in the church because they've been told they don't belong here. Which is why the conversation about, what would Jesus say? What would Jesus do? Is the Ethiopian eunuch allowed to share the gospel? Why it actually matters is because I would actually take a frame as Presbyterian pastor hat fully on that in the current moment of public Christian discourse, having blocks up about who is allowed to belong and who is not, is the same theological heresy as racism, the same theological heresy about slavery. It's the same, because what the Christian ethos has to offer is the beloved family of God, belonging not because they are worthy, but because they are loved. And every voice that we hear right now that says we have too much empathy, every voice that says these people don't belong, is not a voice of Christ. And I think we are being asked to live into our baptismal vows about what does it mean to be a child of Christ in this moment. And this is not the kind of talk I would give to Queer Collective, but I'm with my Presbyterians, and I can tell you that. But for us right now, ways in, and Braylon alluded to this, ways in which I would really encourage you to think about why does this matter, is that there are lots of marginalized communities, but some people in the LGBTQ community are your friends, they are your family, they are your heart. You are protecting yourself.
Marie, one thing I would say to build on that too, you know, when you think about the LGBT community, one thing you have to remember is that that's not monolithic. In other words, it's not a group of people who are all the same. And, you know, it's very easy when we hear conversations around how can the church minister? How can the church do outreach to different communities? You know, sometimes our mind instantly goes to that vulnerable young person who's gotten kicked out by their parents. And don't get me wrong, there's definitely ministry to be done there. But I would also say, remember that LGBT people don't disappear when they turn 30 or 40 or 50. And, you know, I've got a lot of friends who are my age and up who are in that position where they're caring for their own children, but they're also caring for their parents. They're also in that role of dealing with their own impending retirement and finding relationships that matter. So when you think about ministry, remember, it's not that you have one program, but it's that you have a posture of welcome that at all points in life, at all ministries in the church, people find a place at the table. And I think that's really important to remember, is that this ministry isn't segmented to one little part of life, that it has to be something you look at the through line as people go through life.
Yeah. Thank you. So Queer Collective started with potlucks. It moved into support groups. We have a parent support group. We have a gender identity exploration support group, as well as a sexuality support group. We have a teen support group. We have a religious trauma group. And then we also do activities, workshops as needed. So we have allies, we have self-defense. We've done healthy sexuality and sexual health. It was one of my favorites. It was a sex education workshop for parents and teens together.
Called Clutch Your Pearls.
Clutch Your Pearls was the name of that. We also have a found family Thanksgiving and Christmas, so that we can actually celebrate. But this kind of work and this kind of ministry is actually painfully easy to start, like embarrassingly easy. And I think one thing that David was talking about is, what is the need in your community? Fayetteville is different from Little Rock, is different from Benton, is different from Cabot. But I do know that Little Rock started 3 years ago, but 2 years ago, QC Benton started. And this coming Saturday, QC Cabot starts. And I'm not saying you all need to start one of our things, but it's been wildly successful because there's a need. And the need is for genuine welcome and community. And as a result, I think we have 800 people on our vetted roster.
Well,
another
it
question?
speaks to the need. It really speaks to the need. And, you've got a beautiful space here. You've got a beautiful facility. You can utilize what you have here and have a ministry that is equally viable right here.
I do want to talk a little bit about ministry. In that, with Queer Collective, it's really important that the ministry there is the actions of love, not necessarily talking about the Bible. Because the thing about the queer community is a lot of us have been really, really hurt by Christians. And unfortunately, the harm from, I'm using air quote Christians, right? Also reflects upon, fairly or not, it reflects upon the people who do want to actually show love. And so as soon as you start bringing Bible verses into it, then there are going to be people who go, nope, this is not for me. Because, not necessarily because you're doing something wrong or because you're not welcoming, but because they have trauma.
Yeah, they've been legitimately traumatized.
Well, and I would say that really is something where we talk about the spectrum of age and experience. Some people grew up in the church when it was a hard no. When if you came out, you were put out, and it was what it was. And, I think that just to Braylon's point, when you think about doing ministry, you almost kind of have to look at where people were at growing up, what their background was, and how church affected them, to find out how to love them in a way that you can love past some of that, because it's hard. As somebody who had that religious trauma, it's something to get through, let me tell you.
And that's something that we've been very intentional about, is that there are no membership requirements other than kindness. Nobody has to espouse a certain religious belief. We're really cognizant of the need to have pretty much everyone in leadership be somewhere on that LGBTQ spectrum. I'm there as a parent, but I'm also bi. It wouldn't matter though, because I'm married to a man. But it's the kind of thing to say it matters who you're working with and that they are fully represented in that own ministry. And I know that this might not be what this church is interested in right now, but I think we've made our case that it's important, and that it really matters, and that at this moment in the life of the church, in our country, Christendom globally, there's work to be done, and things need mindful, caring people.
On that note, we will close. Braylon will be joining us here for Sunday school on Sunday morning at 9 a.m. I am not sure of the location. We will either be in here or in Upper Witherspoon. We'll figure that out tomorrow and send out an email. So we will be happy to welcome Braylon back. If you think on this and have some questions, that will be a space that you can ask questions in also. If you are not aware, early voting is open in Arkansas. If you heard something up here that made you question, you might want to go do some research before you head to the polls and make sure that you understand your candidate's views on things. With that being said,
Throw one more thing in there, and my parents may be irritated with me for this, but I think we're going to go out to eat at Tzatziki's right after this. And I am making the decision for all three of us to, if you have questions and you want to talk to me, I'm happy to talk over dinner.
that was
Sorry,
a very
Mom.
kind